Hello, and welcome to another episode of Between Two Psychs. In today's episode, we're talking about the real stuff. We're looking into what schools miss when teaching autism. And Mike's going to guide us through a very real scenario, aren't you, Mike?
Certainly am, Adam. Yeah, no dead air here from
No
me.
dead air. He's learnt his lesson, everyone. No
Yeah,
dead air.
no dead air. It was the hate mail I was receiving, Adam. It's put me off.
That was
Dead
me and my
airing you.
bots. That was
Yeah.
me and my bots. Had to get 2 ChatGPT subscriptions just to get through all that.
Yeah, I was talking to a teacher, an experienced teacher, who is a reception class teacher, 30 children in the classroom, and a TA. Quite a large amount of children in her class with special educational needs and disabilities. And, the conversation really just made me feel overwhelmed with the amount of work that she's trying to do in terms of delivering a curriculum, but also then differentiation. And on top of that, trying to understand particular challenges that children present with. So she is, like I say, a reception class. So there are children in the class with what I would class as challenges who haven't yet been diagnosed. And so one of the things that we see quite a lot as ed psychs are young children who are on the pathway to being assessed for autism, sometimes ADHD, but that tends to be a bit later in age, but at this age, certainly on the pathway through autism. So it's probably fair to say that the child I'm going to describe most likely will end up with a diagnosis of autism, but it's not definite.
At this moment in time, they don't have it.
No, not at this moment in time. So what she was describing to me in a conversation was a young child. So we're talking 4 or 5 years old, who wanders around the classroom. Um, Seems to be in another world compared to the peer group, doesn't make any meaningful, obvious social communication gestures, such as facing a person when talking, such as making eye contact, or making physical bodily contact, such as touching the teacher by the hand, etc., etc., and has no purposeful language. So a lot of it is repetition, or what we would class as echolalia. And this person is trying to introduce what the speech therapists have told them to introduce, which is PECS, so PECS, a picture exchange communication system. And for those people that haven't seen that, it comes in various forms, but the one that this teacher's trying to use has widget symbols on it, and the child is just not grasping that at all.
Just for any new listeners, do you want to explain what a widget is?
It's a bit like the sort of matchstick drawings, isn't it?
Yeah.
Black and white drawings of things. So you might have a sad face, but it's a widget face rather than a real picture of a sad face.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing. And the
When you
picture
go
of
into any school, they're all doing interesting things. Like you'll find stickmen picking up books or opening books and all that type of thing.
yeah. So and carpet time. So when the teacher's trying to teach, the other children are sitting on the carpet. This child doesn't seem to grasp that it's a teaching time or it's a listening time. Will come along, sit on people, sit on their heads, sit on their shoulders, roll on them, walk off, and go to the train set and start chewing while all of this is going on the carpets. So it wasn't a sort of a formal involvement of mine. It was more of a conversation, listening to a teacher. And as I said to you, it's just a real life scenario. This is what teachers experience and teachers talk about. So
It
I thought
reminds
it's
me
worth
of a
it.
child I assessed just a few weeks ago. Very similar. Like this child is also waiting for an assessment on the neurodevelopmental pathway. for autism. And if I was to take a punt, I would say they come out with what we either high function autism or Asperger's. Very intelligent child, but just misses all the social cues and doesn't really want to follow routines, marches to the beat of their own drum type thing.
Mm.
And from listening to your story, and I hope I'm speaking for the listener as well, it's like there's a sense of teachers have, particularly in that key stage one, where needs are not as well understood. They can be quite pronounced, can't they? And as they go through the education system, they learn more about themselves and they can manage their needs a bit better. Not in all cases, but in many cases. And for those teachers, they almost need to be experts in autism in order to plan and like you said at the top of the episode, differentiate. How do you differentiate for something you don't fully know about?
Good question.
Well, like us trying to differentiate for an alien, not that children with autism can be considered alien, but they socialize in such a different way that it's very difficult for teachers to build up those routines for them. And before the episode, you mentioned like some of the characteristics that they would do. Like the teacher struggled with eye contact, isn't that right?
But the child did, not the teacher. Mm.
Yeah, sorry, struggled with them managing the fact that the child could make eye contact is what I should have
Yeah,
said. Thanks
yeah.
for correcting me on that.
That's all right. It was just making sure that we are on the same page with that. Yeah. One of the things I've started thinking about as soon as she was sort of finished describing the situation was the basics. So my brain was sort of exploring what are the basic foundations that we would want a child to be secure in order to start to engage in an education.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I was right or wrong in this, Adam, but I started to consider the cause and effect aspect of thinking and talk to her about exploring whether the child was secure in cause and effect.
Yeah. So go into a bit more about what you mean by cause and effect. Do you mean like building up associations or do you mean something else?
It would be association, but the very basics of cause and effect is if I do this, that happens. So if I
Yeah.
press this, that happens. And if we've got, even babies when they're lying under the activity frames, these babies can't sit up yet, but they can move their arms and their eyes and so forth, and they can bang noisy things or shiny things, and they're starting to build up that initial process of if I do this, that happens. And then as they get older, if they press a button, a music plays, or if they press something else, something jumps out of a box, etc. So that was where I was at with the cause and effect in my thinking.
Yeah. And what did you find? Or what did she give you? Do you give you a conclusion on that question?
She's going to look into it, because we were. I don't think at first understand why I was talking about cause and effect, but the reason I was thinking about it was the PEX cards, and I was thinking if he doesn't yet understand that if I do that, this happens. The whole idea of communication is on thin ice, whether it's verbal or whether it's, picture gestures, because it hasn't quite grasped that if I hold this card up and get that, or if I do this, then that happens. So I was just asking it to investigate it.
Yeah, it's coming back to that's, one of the first things we develop in our lives is sense of agency, understanding that we are a body and we can interact with other things in the environment and that other people are bodies who can interact. And for some children, that journey isn't as simple as for others. And, when I do my consultations, I often speak about sensory integration. You said about the children
Mm.
learning to bang things and it
Yeah.
makes noise. Sensory integration allows your senses essentially to make sense of the environment, to process information and to ignore irrelevant information. If you don't have that journey or that process hasn't been smooth, then the stuff you're talking about, cause and effect, it becomes bumpier.
Mm.
And if that doesn't embed, then you can't really engage with an academic curriculum, can you? Because
No.
you don't really understand one, that you have sense of agency, and two, how to make sense of those interactions you have not only with the environment but with others within it. And that's got to be a really difficult task for teachers, particularly
Yeah,
reception level.
exactly. I mean, this is really early thinking skills, and this child is 4 turning 5 if he's in reception,
Yeah, this is what we expect 2-year-olds to be at.
if not younger. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Would you say there is something that needs to happen within that teacher's control? Or do you think that that teacher's got an uphill battle regardless of what she does?
I think at the moment it is an uphill struggle to meet the needs of the child because, as you said, she doesn't really understand the needs of the child and therefore can't really differentiate comfortably to meet where the child's at. So, we were talking about that really as a process of investigation rather than it being a solution. I was saying, if you find out that the child is quite weak in cause and effect, then my thoughts would be to, do cause and effect games and activities that just gradually build up the child's awareness of if this, then that.
You took that right out of my mouth. Next question I was going to ask you is there any room for a play-based curriculum? And it sounds like there is.
Yeah, I think there would absolutely have to be. Yeah.
For the listeners' benefit, let's explain a little bit why we often mention a play-based curriculum. Why is that important at this age group?
Instead of teaching them algebra, Adam, which is what you would do. Is that
I
right?
wouldn't teach them algebra. I'd have them in the sandpit making
Huh.
rude shapes, little poo stains. No, we do talk about this quite a bit. And I think it's an important topic to dig a little bit deeper in, particularly for, in my view, those who experience language delay or social communication difficulties, like those with autism.
Yeah. So, do you want to start by answering that,
No, I
Adam?
want your opinion on
You want? Okay. In other words, you don't know.
I talk
Yeah.
about it, but I definitely do not know what I'm talking about.
So, the reason that we talk about things like a play-based curriculum is because first and foremost, the child is young in age and doesn't really yet have the full cognitive processes to be engaging in more formal teaching and learning, such as sitting down, listening, paying attention, accumulating new information, cementing it with old information. All these sort of thinking processes go on when a child is older. So, play based learning and play based curriculum is about meeting where this young person is at in their cognitive processing. And play is active, it's something that children naturally do, regardless of imagination. Play is something that they naturally do. They move around, they engage, they lift things, they throw things, all this sort of play based activity. And that's why it's so important to start a curriculum for a child such as I've described at a play-based learning level, because you're going to them and entering the world that they are in at the moment rather than asking them to come into your world as a more formalized teacher.
I think that thing you said about they naturally do it, regardless of diagnosis of any
Mm.
sort, every child will naturally engage in some form of play. The most basic one being hitting a rattle or something like that, something very
Yeah.
sensory based.
Yeah.
And I love that you've reduced it down to that. And there's arguments out there that would suggest that we really shouldn't be entering a formal curriculum until the age of 7. The Finnish don't do that. Most of the Scandinavian countries enter later than we do. And with the increase in neurodivergent labels, I'm starting to wonder if our reception years are no longer fit for purpose. They're being asked to engage in formal learning activities when the children are often still at a concrete thinking stage and they're not able to engage in abstract.
Yeah, although, thankfully, I am seeing a lot of schools move away from that, and even, into year one, where they'll spend the first half a term, if not the first term, still in sort of free flow play-based activities, and desk laid out with certain activities on them. But there is a lot of free flow still. But I do get what you mean. Yeah.
And I do see that too. And our reception teachers hold my take my hat off to them because they go out of their way to learn the developmental side of children, and they do a
Yeah,
fabulous job with the limited resources that they have.
they do.
What else might make this teacher's life a bit easier?
Well, we do need to focus in on the playing activities, but as this teacher said to me, how can I do that when I've got 29 other children that I need to be working with? Even with a TA in the classroom, how am I meant to do this? What am I meant to do that's going to be meaningful and purposeful for this child? But at the same time, I'm available to 29 others. I think that's a big call. And I'm sitting here in a room now. I'm not in a classroom with all these children calling for my attention. I'm at risk of being told that I'm sitting in an ivory tower. I'm not experiencing those things that this teacher had, but I think that's a real difficulty, isn't it?
It is a real difficulty, and one, it depends how skilled that teaching assistant is. But
Mm.
historically, reception classes tended to have two TAs, but increasingly you only find one, if any. Some I find, but it's just the teacher. At that age group, you need to be reducing the class sizes if you're going to have just one adult or even just two adults in it, and simply because of that age, the interactions need to be regular. They need to be intense. They need to be not intense. Sorry, they need to be available because children don't have at that age the attention spans of their older. Well, I was going to say peers or not peers, but older children. And so you can't expect them to sit there for 10, 15 minutes at a time.
No. To answer your question, though, what we did start talking about was the basics of classroom delivery and organization. So I asked the teacher, "Do you have a visual timetable?" And she said, "Yes, I do." And I said,
So
"Is
she
that for the
use it
whole
then.
class?" Well, she does use it. I said, "Is that for the whole class or is that for this child?" And she said, "It's the whole class." So I said, one of the things you could do is to create a visual timetable solely for this child. And, then I sort of reinforced some of the good practices I've seen, such as a beginning and end box that some teachers have used. So the child takes the symbol off the visual timetable, puts it in the beginning box, and they know that that's what they're doing. And when they finish the task, they put it in the end box, and then they get the next symbol. So she said that that was something she could do. Also talked about, the teach approach and using elements of that, such as creating a distraction-free workspace for a child. Some children, diagnosed or not, do like that sort of distraction free, almost putting some cupboard shelves around a desk so that they can focus in on what the activity is. So she said that was something she could do. And then talking about the play, the child predominantly just liked running a train down its tracks. And so we spoke about what the child actually does. And I think that all the child does is just run the train around the track repetitively. So I said, there's a chance there that this child is enjoying the sensory experiences associated with the train going on the track rather than it being a play-based activity. In other words, it didn't sound like the child was using imagination and creating a make-believe world. From what she was telling me, I might be wrong, but it sounded more like it was repetitive actions. So we started to look at what we could do to insert cause and effect so that the child might have to then start thinking, okay, if I do this and that happens. So, maybe breaking the track and then seeing if the child can work with the TA or the teacher to reconstruct the track. Okay. Or starting to insert other actions into it so that the child is moving from repetitive action into problem solving actions, which again is all to do with cause and effect. What do you think?
I want to hear more about these problem solving actions.
Okay. So the reason I was inserting the problem solving actions was again because we've got to encourage the thinking processes, the early thinking processes that many children acquire through their imaginative play, but some children with autism don't experience that because they're into repetitive play and they're not using imagination and make believe. It's repetitive sensory actions that they're engaging in rather than cognitive problem solving actions. So
From listening to you talk there, it sounds like you were trying to explore, going back to what you said at the beginning, the level of play they're at is reflective of the developmental states they're at. So for this child, the sensory level, one of the earliest forms of development. And you're through that play, you're trying to work on their executive function. And you said about problem solving, but you're doing it through play and seeing if there's a break in the track. How do I continue my play? I have to deal with this problem, don't I? And you essentially trying to get the most cognitive output for the child with the least amount of distress.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds really good to me. I think I'm hoping teachers listen to it would be, going, okay, I'm going to go out and buy a Mega Blocks train set tomorrow or something.
But I want to rewind the clock slightly a few seconds to what you just said there, Adam, because what we call executive functioning is fairly new language. Do you want to give a brief overview of what that is so that people know?
Yeah, I will. So, executive functioning is a combination of traits or skill sets that tend to communicate with each other, and we think of these as a subsection of cognition. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but I'll rattle as many as I can. So, impulse control is one, working memory is one, problem solving I think is one. Mike, help us out here. Phonological loops one, not phonological. Is it phonological loop? It is phonological loop, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. And I can't remember the rest. I'll have to look them up. But essentially, do you know them all, Mike? Are you going to show me up here?
I won't show you up now because I don't know them all.
We both need our little textbooks with us when we're doing consults. But essentially, what Mike was trying to do was, with his example, is the by engaging the executive function skill of problem solving through play, that child will then be able to hopefully, the hope is then start to engage some of the other functions, such as in the communication with someone else will improve attention. Attention's another one, sorry. Will improve the attention of being able to focus on a problem. When you can improve attention, you can then start to assimilate information, which helps the working memory aspect. When you can get the working memory going, you can start to engaging deeper in the problem solving aspect of it. And essentially, it's a bit like kindling. You're getting all the little bits of dry grass together in order to get a big flame. And so you're trying to kickstart this child's learning journey through play. And what Mike skillfully done in that example was identify which stage of development this child is at. So I like to think of development as it is not just in stages, but there are general accepted stages. And I like to think of it as sensory development first, then language, then emotional development, and then cognitive development. And then alongside each of those, you have social presentation, which includes communication. And you need all those together in order to be effective at learning, in my view.
Yeah, it's a nice description. If you think about us working in linear levels, you could take what you've just said and kind of work through it. But just to reassure anyone who's listening, we're human beings. We never follow the absolute pattern that a theory says we should follow. So you might get some children whose cognitive development is far in advance of their emotional development, and that's okay. It's a guide rather than it has to be done like this.
And we are absolutely human. And Mike and I never follow guides because if we did, we would have anticipated executive functioning and came up with the 7 of them. But, so if anyone thought we were like reading off scripts, you now know that we do not.
No, we do not. But it is good to put the executive function into this conversation. It was something I'd forgotten about, Adam. You're just kind of thinking through so many things. But the reason it's good to insert is because it's about preparing children for the more formalized side of learning. And once they get into key stage 1 and higher, it is more formalized. So all of this that we're talking about, yeah, absolutely, is play and all these sort of things that we do. It's all about putting the building blocks into the child's brain to help them to start to engage with a curriculum.
And for any teacher, or not teachers, parents listening, that formal curriculum is important to keep in mind. And I don't want to be putting anxiety into anyone, but it's more abstract and you need to be able to sit with information and think about it and then begin to assimilate it and then apply it within an abstract problem. And to do that, you need to go through the concrete learning phases, which is things like learning to read, learning your phonics, your cardinal value of number, your number sequences, all these things. That's why we go through it. So you have a grasp of what is the concrete leading into the abstract.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not sure, going back to the original description that this teacher was telling me, if she was listening, I'm not entirely sure that we've taken her in half an hour from a problem to a solution, but it's indicative of how we think as psychologists when we're facing challenges that teachers are experiencing. And we're trying to get into the world with the teacher to work alongside the teacher rather than, we have all the answers. We don't have the answers. This episode shows that we don't have the answer, but it shows that we have a different approach, through our education, that we're trying to think through why a child is presenting as they are and help those that know the child well to get to some point of clarity.
And just sort of build on that point, it's how you view the problem. If you view the problem as within the child, then the child is one who has to be fixed so that when our involvement finishes, they look like and act like one of their peers. Everybody knows that's not going to happen. The problem in this scenario is the teacher's ability to engage with that child and progress them. And if you look at it through that lens, you have addressed the problem. And in my view, to a certain extent, you've fixed the problem. But that child's always going to have needs. It's just the nature of the development cycle that they're on.
They might not have needs always, Adam. Look at you. You've come on a long way since I started working with you.
It's just apathy, mate. DrAdamMcCartney.com. And also get me on my socials, LinkedIn and Instagram. Just type in my name, Adam McCartney, and I should come up. Mike, what about you?
Yeah, it's the same. So on social media and LinkedIn, and also ridgewaypsychology.co.uk.
Great. Thanks for another great one, Mike. See you soon.
Cheers, Adam. Bye.
Sorry, to build on that point, it's how you view the problem. If you view the problem as within the child, then the child is one who has to be fixed so that when our involvement finishes, they look like and act like one of their peers. Everybody knows that's not going to happen. The problem in this scenario is the teacher's ability to engage with that child and progress them. And if you look at it through that lens, you have addressed the problem. And in my view, to a certain extent, you've fixed the problem. But that child's always going to have needs. It's just the nature of the development cycle that they're on.
They might not have needs always, Adam. Look at you. You've come on a long way since I started working with you.
It's just apathy, mate. DrAdamMcCartney.com. And also get me on my socials, LinkedIn and Instagram. Just type in my name, Adam McCartney, and I should come up. Mike, what about you?
Yeah, it's the same. So on social media and LinkedIn, and also ridgewaypsychology.co.uk.
Great. Thanks for another great one, Mike. See you soon.
Cheers, Adam. Bye.